Thank you to everyone who is joining us on our live stream tonight on Facebook and YouTube. We will be getting started in just 1 minute. Thank you again for joining us on our live stream. Here is Laura Washington.
Good evening, everyone. Before we get to tonight's big show, we need to share with you that the Sun-Times has everything in the news that matters to you and then some. And we're going to be bringing it all to you wherever you are. Remember, if you subscribe to the Chicago Sun-Times and get our indispensable e-paper, which is a daily digital replica of the print product, and it lives at paper.suntimes.com, you will get a special digital offer that gives you unlimited access to both the e-paper and every story at suntimes.com for only $2.49 a month. Cannot be beat. You can learn more and subscribe at suntimes.com/subscribe. Welcome to the show and a special edition on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the birth of Harold Washington, Chicago's first Black mayor. We've assembled a stellar panel of people who worked in the Washington campaigns, in his administration, and those who covered and chronicled him. And this is not just a panel, it's a reunion. And I want to introduce our old friends, starting with Jackie Grimshaw, who was an advisor and strategist for Harold Washington's 1983 mayoral campaign. She later led the Mayor's Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and now serves as a vice president for governmental affairs at the Center for Neighborhood Technology. Luis Gutierrez is the former U.S. representative for Illinois, representing the 4th Congressional District. Representative Gutierrez worked on Washington's campaign and later was a key city council ally who helped the mayor win his majority after years of council wars. Peter Nolan is a former NBC5 Chicago political reporter. His book, Campaign, The Election That Rocked Chicago, has just been reissued on the note of the 100th anniversary of Harold Washington's birth. And Gary Rivlin, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of Friar on the Prairie, which chronicled the Washington years. His new book, Saving Main Street, Small Business in the Time of COVID, will be out this fall. I covered Washington's 1983 campaign and the first half of his administration, and then later I went to serve as deputy press secretary. And Lynn Sweet, our at the table co-host and Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, also covered the mayor back in the day. Lynn, can you kick us off by setting the stage for the 1983 primary and the candidates?
Okay, and thank you. And it's great to be here and to see everybody. As you may see in the background, I brought downstairs to my home studio here a Harold Washington banner that was part of the cityscape back in the day. So let me set the stage. As Laura said, in 1983, Mayor Byrne was the mayor. She lost her popularity. She lost the support of much of the Black community. By then, there was an election coming up. And months before that, in 1982, members of the Black and Brown and liberal community were kind of looking around for a candidate. So Harold Washington, to compress this, was asked to run, and he said, well, if you find a bunch of people to register, maybe I will. And Nat Hatch, come alive. Remember all that? That was one of the big slogans. It was, we shall see in 83 and come alive. So now we're in 1983, he runs. Harold Washington was seen as the long shot member of Congress, had legal problems, law license suspended, didn't pay taxes. So he'd run for mayor. Rich Daley, the state's attorney, was running, and the race was seen as a matchup mainly between Mayor Byrne and Rich Daley. Now, before I go further, everyone's wondering, since we are talking about the election of Chicago's first Black mayor, was race a factor? And I'll put that on the table. Race was always a factor. But during a lot of the campaign and the primary, it didn't come up until the very last days when two reporters were at a church in Portage Park and they heard Ed Vrdolyak talk about the race. And he said, and I'm synthesizing what he said it's a racial thing. That got out. The campaign was able to make a commercial. And in the end, primary campaign, which was marked by a very exuberant time in the city, in a sense. We could talk about that with buttons and everything else. So in the end, Washington won 36.7%, with Byrne coming in third and Rich Daley last. Now, when we go to the general campaign, back in that day, this was just a partisan race. We don't have it now. The Republican was Bernard Epton, a state representative from Hyde Park, seen as a liberal, but the race got ugly because his slogan was, vote for Bernie Epton before it's too late. Eventually, Mayor Washington won the Bernie Epton battle, 51.9. Starting what we'll now discuss, Laura and everyone else, the first years of this very historic mayoralty. And I hope we could discuss the very historic nature too of the campaign.
Thanks for laying that out, Lynn. And I guess I'd love to go to Jackie Grimshaw, since Jackie, you were there at the beginning, actually way before the beginning. And I'd love to just go back to the whole issue of race that Lynn raised and the role that race played. And now, a lot of people, I wrote a piece for the Chicago Reporter. I covered the mayor's campaign while I was at the Chicago Reporter as their political reporter. And I wrote a piece called Race of the Race. And I thought very early on that race was obviously a factor, even though the white power establishment, the supporters of Byrne and Daley sort of ignored Harold Washington. Race really mattered. Would you agree with that, Jackie?
Absolutely. And we recognized that race was going to be a factor in the campaign before we ever got started. And so we had one of our supporters in Hyde Park do an analysis of the voting pattern of all the people in Chicago and the way they voted in mayoral elections. And we, as a result, built our campaign targeting where we thought we could get votes, and those precincts where only thing we could do was protect the vote on election day. So that was the way we approached the campaign, not in terms of a negative campaign against either of the other two candidates, but how can we maximize the vote for Harold Washington in a very racially divided city. So that's how we started. And of course, we got what we expected from the other side. We got the nasty stuff. And probably the thing that was most outrageous was the vice president came to support the Harold and they went to a church on the north side. And the folks up there were so ugly that they were throwing things, they were saying nasty things to the president as well as to Congressman Washington. And it was really an embarrassment for the city. But I think the only thing it did in terms of our base supporters is to galvanize the vote that we were working on in our base to get out and vote for Harold Washington. But I can go on. There are a lot of nasty stuff that happened in the campaign.
So what was the breakdown, the racial breakdown in the primary and the general, Jackie, in terms of the percentages, demographic percentages, and did he do any better in the general in terms of bringing in a more diverse set of voters than in the primary?
Yeah, absolutely. The city was, I don't know, I don't remember the exact number, but roughly a third Black, a third Latino, and a third white. And so our base actually, we built on the 1/3 that's Black, as well as building on the part of the 1/3 that was Latino, and then getting the lakefront, as we call them, lakefront liberals, up and down the lakefront, so that we had a coalition of Black, brown, and white supporters that came out on election day. Now, in the general election, yes, we did get the support of some of those folks, and Louis can probably comment on this. But one of the things I learned during the campaign that the Mexican Americans kind of like in Mexico, the tendency was to support the incumbent, right? So Jane Byrne was the mayor, and she started off with that Mexican American support. But in the general election, we were able to build on the support we did have. It's not that we didn't get any support out of the Mexican American community, but we were able to increase that vote as well as the white vote along the lakefront. And I think we even got some of the kind of outlying wards, some votes, not a lot, but some votes. If you look at the final vote tally, there were votes in most of the precincts in Chicago.
Luis, you wanted to pick up on that? Where did the Latino vote come from, and how, and why did that happen at that time?
Well, let me just say this. First of all, to Jackie, thank you for that little mention of love. I know she probably didn't realize it, but she said Louis. And if you remember, it was Chewy and Louis and Chewy. And so when you go back to that time, no, Jackie's representative of a time, right, in my life, right, where everybody calls me Louis. I just went to the Harold Washington celebration at the Harold Washington Library. I never got called Louis as much. The last time I got called Louis that much, I was 15 years old. Okay, but to me, it's a word of love, right? It's a word of remembrance of a certain time in terms of how people. And let me just, so I remember that during the primary, I was a poll watcher. I went and defended a whole 11 votes that Harold Washington got in the precinct, spent all day there. And then Dan Rostenkowski's precinct captain knocked on my door and said, Mr. Gutierrez, would you and your lovely wife please put up a sign? It said Epton before it's too late. Now, two things happened, Laura. Number one, I was very, very angry that somebody would think I would put such a racist poster in my window, number one. But second, I felt ashamed that all I had done was be a poll watcher. So I raced down to Fullerton and Western, and you know who I met? I met the Reverend Slim Coleman. He was running the operation there, and he gave me a poll sheet, right?
And just wow. So for those who don't remember Slim was, he was an activist from Uptown.
Yes.
Again, another one of those people that was there from the very beginning. Yeah.
From the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And I think what he represented was, so what did I do? What life did I live? I worked 9 to 5 days a week. On weekends, I drank my old style and paid my dominoes. And, went to baptism, quinceañeras, right? Weddings. Had a good life. Had a child, owned a home. But after that day they came with that poster, Laura, it changed my life because I took that post sheet and yes, what did I do? And I'm proud of this. I went through the post sheet and I went and canvassed my whole neighborhood. You know, Laura, I met Black people who were my neighbors that I didn't know before. I met Latinos and Puerto Ricans that were my neighbors that lived in my neighborhood that I didn't know, but I also spoke to white voters and we came together. Remember that precinct where Harold got 11 votes? It was 380 to 320 in the general election. And Jackie's right. Let me just say this. About 20% of the vote that Harold got in the primary was Latino, right? 20% of the Latinos. That means 80% of them either voted for Rich Daley or voted for Jane Byrne. In the general election, it was 60-40.
Really?
Yes, because he actually, you could see the massive. And look, I also want to say before we move, because so many people have, I want to say, I'm not the only one that was a potato couch, right? Sitting kind of cynical, why should I get involved? Lynn, you and Laura know thousands, if not tens of thousands of Chicagoans made up an army. Harold Washington, he inspired us all and he changed and transformed all of our lives. And I think he changed the map, I know he changed the map, the political map of the city of Chicago.
That's a great, really important point. And I want to go to Gary, to you and Peter. Is there a great story or a significant story that stands out in your mind that tells us something very important about the campaigns or even about the Washington administration? Gary?
You know, it's interesting. I was starting off as a writer, which meant that I was making most of my money as a bartender at that point. And, you know, I I'm from New York. That's where I am now. But I went to college in Chicago, and I stayed. Just was fascinated by Chicago politics, and I would do these rent-a-party gigs, like show up at someone's house and be the bartender. And I remember doing several of them during the campaign. I was starting to write for the Reader. There's just a few articles. And it was during the campaign, and these nice white liberal people, I thought were really pleasant and stuff. And but I'm just in the room, right? I'm just standing there, and they're friends, and they're drunk, and they're 20 or 30. I remember this one in the Lincoln Park, and they start just talking about the N-word running for mayor. It's just like, what? Where? Huh? And the lakefront was such a disappointment. I mean, Jackie, I know what you're saying. You're accentuating the positive that you got 5%, 1 out of 20 of white ethnic Northwest, Southwest side Chicago. It's been 0. But white lakefront, I wish I had the numbers in front of me. I don't think he ever got a majority in 43, 44. I'm not going to swear by that, but he did shockingly poorly, even in 87, even after you saw this guy's a reformer, he's trying to open up government. There's this before and after in Chicago with Harold Washington that, he's the first anti-machine. I mean, he's the first Black mayor, a pioneer, that's indelible, but he was so much more than that. I don't think the media ever gave him credit for that. But after seeing all the ways he cut, a Black man comes in with, unemployment in the Black community, and he cut the city payroll by thousands of people. He was just trying to reform this broken, flabby machine. And yet he barely got any more votes in 1987 than he did in 1983. So I don't know why I'm starting with my disappointment in, I guess I was Luis. I never knew that, by the way.
It's okay.
I really did.
Louis and Joy.
Sorry, Mr. Congressman.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, I always thought that was, it taught me something I never unlearned as an observer, as a journalist. I mean, it's interesting, in 2020, 21, 22, we were starting to talk about white privilege and all this stuff. But back then it was ugly. I lived on the Northwest side in Richard Mel's ward. I got the nastiest racial, vine to replace the elevators in City Hall with vines. Like, what? So cynical. Crime is going to go up because it's a Black mayor. Actually, murder went down during the Washington years. But we say it today. But anyway, I'll stop. But there's so many things we see today, unfortunately, that we all experienced in the 1980s.
Yeah, the racism is alive and well, and what I would just say is that Harold Washington talked about race and racial equity before the term was even coined, much less fashionable as it is now. And he was being very outspoken and open about fairness. And I think that probably scared a lot of white people, because for the same reason it scares them now. But I want to move to Peter, to you, and get your recollections. But what do you think about what Gary said about maybe the media didn't give Harold Washington enough credit, or the credit that was due to him as a member of the media at that time?
Well, let me say that I was a reporter who covered the campaign. Now, I didn't cover, Jackie might remember this, I was assigned to two losers. I was assigned to Richard M. Daley in the primary, and I was assigned to Bernie Epton in the general election. Now, we did, I think Carol Marine covered Jane Byrne mostly, and the late Paul Hogan spent, I think Jackie might remember that, he was with the Herald's campaign. I did, but if somebody wasn't there, we spilled over to the other campaigns. And I remember being at the University of Illinois Pavilion that night when Harold spoke. I think there were 20,000 people there, and it was just tremendous. When you say, did he get enough credit in the campaign by the media? I thought he got fair coverage. Of course, the campaign, as everybody knows, was all about. Race was the biggest thing. It was, and I remember going into a Bernie Epton rally up on the north side. I don't think it was the congressman's ward, but everybody, an all white audience yelling, Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. And I'm thinking, I'm standing there with my crew.
And he's a Republican.
I'm there with my crew and I'm thinking, are they, I mentioned this in the book, are they really yelling white guy, white guy, white guy? But Harold was, you know, was really an original. He had such a powerful voice and personality and a fabulous smile. He overcame those two things that would hurt any politician early on in his career, that he had failed to, he lost his law license for a while because he didn't file
his
for a
taxes.
cleaning lady who paid him $50. But he was also had, then he had the income tax thing. Harold, everybody that knows him had a stubborn streak too. When he was younger, he could have settled both those things easily, and he chose not to do it. But he overcame that stuff, and he became really I knew him mostly in the legislature, and I interviewed him many times down there, and he was not one of his white buddies at Roosevelt University said here was a guy, a bright guy who was held back by race all of his years, and he never was bitter about it. He just thought people needed to learn more about it. Those are my thoughts about Harold.
So
Peter, do you remember sui generis?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Oh, sui generis?
Yes.
I know the term, but
so Jackie, so people know what the heck you're talking about. What the heck?
Well, Harold would say all the time what Peter said in English. That's Latin for one of a kind, or no.
Yes.
There's a more elegant way of putting it, but essentially that's what it meant. Sui generis. He said it all the time.
So
Jackie, that was his vocabulary. But go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah.
So Jackie may or may not remember, everyone, all my late night phone calls to her during the campaign when we were talking about everything from where she was picking yard signs up, or I guess down, to more strategic things. But I wanted to share a very vivid memory of when I, as a young and aspiring political reporter, realized something was going on. One of the things that was really big back in the day were wearing buttons, and the Washington campaign had these big blue buttons with, it looked like a kind of a rainbow. There were lines on it. And it came to pass that Daley and Byrne would have buttons too, and people wore them as badges to tell where everybody was. But I saw more Washington badges. But when I was out on the street, I would go through neighborhoods in the city, and yes, especially in the South and West Side, because it was crucial to turn out the Black vote. And there would be a sound truck saying, Harold's here. And people would just come on the streets. And there would be people, an outpouring of people to just see something that I don't know if you could replicate it in this way with just a sound truck coming and people running out to see what's going on. But that was one very unscientific way of understanding that something was going on out in the precincts. The other thing I want to point out is that the primary and the general was the first time that all the candidates used TV ads. And this was important because it was another way of communicating with voters. Harold Washington got a little late because he didn't have the money. And by the time of the, he had a set of commercials for the general, for the primary, and then for the general. And we talked about a few moments ago, this ugly incident at St. Paschal Church when Vice President Mondale and Harold Washington were jeered and booed. Well, the campaign, in a very, very quick turnaround, created a commercial called Shame, and it had one of the iconic bits of video of an angry young white man jeering Mondale and Washington, and it had this very effective, I thought, line in it from the voiceover. What's happening when you vote on Tuesday, be sure it's a vote you could be proud of.
There are moments in our country's history of which all Americans are thoroughly and profoundly ashamed. One of those moments may be happening now, here in Chicago. When you vote on Tuesday, be sure it's a vote you can be proud of.
So, as well as the street stuff and the street organizing, you had a lot of things going on for Chicagoans for a first time in setting this campaign and setting the history of the campaigns in the city that Washington would have even in his reelection.
And I remember covering the debates. I think were there a couple of debates, Jackie? Is that right? between the three candidates.
Three debates, yeah.
Three debates, and that is where, and talk about imagery. That wasn't about a campaign commercial. That was about a public news event that really, I think, in many ways, changed the dynamic of the campaign because it gave Harold Washington a stage, an equal stage.
Yes.
The media hadn't really given him equal credit as a candidate, but he was there on stage with Vernon Daly, and he showed him up, in my opinion. And it was a really great to see. So, Jackie, what do you recall? What was the significant thing that came out of those debates?
Laura, you're absolutely right. It did kind of change the campaign because one of the things that we were fighting in the Black community was the thought that a Black man can't win in Chicago. That it was an impossible, Don Quixote type enterprise. And so when Harold was on the stage with those other two candidates, and he was the third candidate to answer the first question, and he started by saying, I am going to be the first one on the stage to answer your question, and proceeded to answer the question. But more than that, he described himself on the stage that he was the best candidate for mayor of the city of Chicago, and went on to demonstrate it throughout that debate and the other two debates. So I think his performance not only spoke to the media that we better pay attention to this guy, but it got to the audience that I was interested in, and that was our base vote, overcoming the fear that it was impossible, a task for a Black man to be elected mayor of Chicago.
Louis, you're not
Yes.
your head. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, the debates, without them, I don't think Harold wins. The debates were critical. You put them on the stage, and it was clearly who was the most eloquent.
Yeah.
And I don't want to diminish the intelligence of Jane Byrne or Richie Daley, but if you looked at them, you said, who's got the IQ here? Who's got the language, right? Who is really speaking so elegantly, so eloquently, so forcefully, and at the same time, so intelligently? It was clearly Harold Washington, and that broke a stereotype, right? It broke the stereotype. And it helped me and others to be able to go out there and campaign. One of the things, it was so bad at Roberto Clemente High School that when Richard Daley ran in 1989 for mayor, and there was a debate at Roberto Clemente High School, Richie Daley told me, I'm not going back there. I still remember getting booed. And it was a terrible, he remembers I had a terrible experience back there. Of course, to Lynn and to Laura, you know what I responded to then State's Attorney Daley? I said, yeah, I was doing the booing. So you don't have to quite worry about at least one less voice out there booing you at Clemente. Anyways, I think they were critical to the city. And I do want to say that by 1987, not only did Harold carry the 26th ward by a majority, okay? Not only did he carry the 22nd ward by a majority in the primary, by the general election, he defeated Nesda, Joe Barrios, and the Keene Machine in the 31st ward, carried the 31st ward, and he defeated Miguel Santiago, the current alderman who was part of the Verdoli Act 29. So I get it that there was still a lot to do, and I know I'm speaking through my small prism, right, of the kid from Humboldt Park, but in Humboldt Park, we were unifying people. We were bringing people together. And if you look at my reelection effort, right, we did bring a broad coalition of people together. Could we have done better, as Gary Rivlin suggests to us? Absolutely. Would Harold have done better? Because I believe that at the moment of his death, he was at the pinnacle of his power and influence, because he had defeated everybody, right? He was, you remember that he went to Paczynski and said, you can run for clerk. Remember all of that? The dream ticket that he put together just before, and they all won. So all I'm trying to say is that as soon as he wins re-election, the next time around, what does he do? He goes to somebody like Aurelia Paczynski. He goes to Carol Mosley Broad. Remember, she gets to run at the county level.
Senator who went on to become U.S.
together
Senator.
This beautiful coalition of people. Unfortunately, he wasn't there to see his success, right? But at the same time, it was a beautiful success story.
I want to move to, there's so much history to cover. We're not going to get to it now, but we had to talk about council wars because, of course, Louis Gutierrez was one of the people that broke the dam on council wars, the 29-21. And we solicit questions from folks in advance from our audience. So I just want to kick us off with this question from Suzanne S. And she says, Harold Washington remains seemingly unflappable in the face of all the dirty tricks aldermen. How did he cope? And do you miss him as much as I do? Whether we miss him or not, Gary, what was your vantage point from covering that in terms of him managing the Verdoliak-Burke 29?
I mean, I was on the outside. A few on this call were on the inside. You know, I did do some reporting for the book after the fact, but I don't know. Harold Washington had lots of gifts, amazing coalition builder. We talked about his intellect, his vocabulary as a kid who was reading books every day and inhaled words. Amazing, but he's kind of got angry, I thought, you know, early on. And I thought you could see it. I mean, one thing that's amazing about Washington, at least for Peter and I, as people writing about him from the outside, is he's fascinating. He's, you know, he's kind of this regular guy, just in the sense that someone, I think, Lynn, you said earlier, he didn't pay his taxes. He paid his taxes. He just didn't file the forms.
File the returns. Sorry. Yes. Thank you.
He's probably owed money. He had a chip on his shoulder, as someone else mentioned. Like, he would screw up and not pay his bills. I think he was so monomaniacal. He was just so focused on whatever it was. Just, this is a man who was talking about police brutality starting in the 70s, like now 50 years later, now we're talking about it, you know, maybe since 2015 or so, it's become a part of national dialogue. Back in the early 70s, that's what he broke with the Chicago machine. What was his friend, Ralph Metcalf's best friend?
Yeah, his congressman, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what made him break with the machine. I don't know, he sort of is an extraordinary figure, but, you know, very, very human, and I think kind of being angry when he gets hit was part of that.
Peter, you cover council wars?
You know, I'm trying to think. I left broadcasting around 1987. Actually, I did cover some of council wars. One of the things I remember when Harold, you know, he had a short fuse, as they said, as a young guy too, and he was a boxer. And on the council floor, Verdoliak was saying something and that he didn't like, and Harold said, "You better be careful, Mr. Verdoliak, or you're going to get a mouthful of something you don't want." And then another time, that was kind of a light moment. Verdoliak got up and said that he wanted to thank the mayor for he bet on a horse at Arlington or somewhere called Sweet Harold, and it had a good payoff of a couple $100. And Harold said, "Well, you know, maybe you ought to think about sharing some of the proceeds to that." And if Verdoliak comes back and says, "Hey, I've been trying to do that for 3 years, and it's going one way. But, you know, Harold, Mike Royko wrote a great column right after the election. He said, "Don't worry, Uncle Chester. Mayor Washington is not going to marry your daughter." And it was his way of saying, nothing's, you know, there's not a big disaster that this guy is the mayor. And it certainly wasn't. There was no person better prepared to be mayor since Mayor Richard J. Daley. Harold had been in politics all his life, government. He knew how everything worked. And when he was in office, he, you know, the garbage got picked up. The police headquarters was not moved to the south side as some people had feared. And he ran a good show. He opened up government. You know, a lot of the papers couldn't get into a lot of city departments and get records. They'd have to file freedom of information requests. Harold opened all that stuff up to have transparency.
Yes.
So he had a lot more to. The congressman is absolutely right that debate was unbelievable for Harold. He was just terrific. He was way above the rest. He outclassed everybody on that stage.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
the point of it, and Jackie may remember this, the Sun-Times did, and I was one of the reporters, because so much data was available, we did a whole series that became a book. And we had who works for the city, you know, we could go on. And there's a picture of a very young Lynn Swain and very younger Jackie Grimshaw on this. But the point is, statistics that were not available, that could be compiled, did come before, that were never really able to be easily put together. We didn't need years of FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests to put it together, to set the stage for Harold's reelection for the second term that, as we've been talking about, he died a few months after he was elected.
And so we only have a few minutes left. So I want to do, this has been so great. We should have done another, we should do another hour on this, you know?
Please.
It only comes around once every 100 years. I have to think about it.
Yeah.
And it's great. But I want to close out by asking each of you, Rufus W., another one of our loyal watchers, asks, what is the greatest lesson from the election and administration of Mayor Washington? The greatest lesson. Jackie?
You know, Lynn, I think, started to touch on it, and that was Harold really brought the people into government. You know, Harold would say that this government belongs to the people, and he opened up government so that people could participate, so that, you know, researchers and reporters could see what was happening, right? Harold made us go out to the community before budget time and listen to people's needs and concerns in the community. And then that ended up being the basis for us building a budget. And so, you know, the openness, you know, the freedom, the transparency, you know, getting rid of the patronage that governed who could participate in terms of employment and contracting with the city of Chicago. So, you know, I think, you know, if there's a legacy for Harold, is that government should be of value and for the people. And he did that in Chicago.
And to that, let me just read a story that was headlined, Mayor Staff Outsiders Are In. The outsiders are in. A startling number of them are women. Chicago never before has seen anything like Mayor Washington's staff and cabinet. Quote, my God, how things have changed, said Jacqueline Grimshaw, a top mayoral staffer who had spent years fighting City Hall.
Yep.
Absolutely. Those reforms and those changes are part of, are just heart and soul of government now. And you could never go back. And I don't think any politician in City Hall would ever want to even try to go back. Luis Gutierrez, what's the greatest lesson?
Yeah. The greatest lesson is that he represents everybody with courage. Two things. I know that I speak I can say this. I know women feel this way. Black people feel this way. The LGBTQ community feels this way, that they were finally not invisible. Okay. I'm just going to give it to you from a Latino perspective, right? While we were invisible at City Hall, nobody ever saw us. And yet, Deputy Mayor for Infrastructure under Harold Washington. That's a top cabinet position, Deputy Mayor. Maria Celda, Mayor's Office of Employment and Training. Laura, before that, you and I both know the Puerto Rican was always the assistant to somebody's assistant. But under Harold Washington, wow, he gave us the realms of power, infrastructure and jobs, and 2 Puerto Ricans are in charge. Wow. No, I have to say it that way just to kind of break through the ice, right? And secondly, I still remember the Gay Rights Ordinance. And look, I'm Catholic. I was born Catholic. That's where I'm baptized. That's how I'm going to be died. I expect to have my last rites. And we bring up the Gay Rights Ordinance, right? And the cardinal, who the year before had said, yeah, we shouldn't discriminate on sexual orientation, comes out like a couple of days before and says, no, we're all going to vote no. We still voted for it. Why? Because Harold Washington did something unique that many of us forget. He put at the same level LGBTQ rights with civil rights. Remember, Jackie, what he said? He said, gay rights are civil rights. Wow. For a man to put those 2 things at the same level, they are at the same level. They deserve to be at the same level. We're talking 1986. Let's remember, it took our President Barack Obama almost to the last year of his presidency before he came out for gay marriage. So this was a man who, in spite of the fact that there were Black ministers, the cardinal, rabbis saying no, he stood on his principle because if anything, Harold was a civil rights advocate.
It's another example of how far ahead of his time he was on so many issues.
He was thank you, Laura. He was far ahead of his time.
Gary Rivlin, your greatest lesson.
It's like you're reading my mind, Louis, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about. By coincidence, I was writing a profile, Dr. Ron Sable, who's trying to be the first alderman. And so I went to the first, I was also friends with a deputy, or actually Kit Duffy. She was the LBGT, I don't know if that's the term they used back then, liaison.
I think she was a gay and lesbian liaison. Is that the right term, Jackie?
Yeah,
Right.
yes.
And I remember going there and I was impressed. I'm a liberal-minded fellow, but why is he doing this? He's got so many battles going on, the council wars, they're playing race. There's so many things going on. There's, Louise, you mentioned, they just got the Black preachers. I mean, also kind of I call them the Black machinists, the machine aldermen who were from the Black communities who kind of wish Harold Washington was a different kind of mayor because, hey, we want our spoils now. So he's taking on all these different things and he's spending political capital. And 2 things. One, he's just one principled guy. I mean, this is what he believes, and no one's going to tell him he can't go because it's going to hurt him politically. If you tell him that, he might go because of that. But the other thing is that he was an extraordinary coalition builder. I mean, this, kind of this idea of a rainbow coalition, that wasn't his term, but this multiracial progressive coalition built around shared priorities, kind of progressive totems like affordable housing. Let's rebalance so downtown doesn't get everything and the neighborhoods share a different approach to economic development. And he brought all these people together. It worked in the Latino community. Luis, you are correct. He got a big majority by the general election in 1987. It did not work as well with the Northwest, Southwest, and as I've been arguing, the liberal lakefront. But in a weird way, when he passed away, it kind of had worked. People are like, why did we hate him? Why did we not give credit? I actually feel if Harold Washington had run for re-election with the mindset everyone had after he died, where finally he was getting his due, the media could break through whatever wasn't allowing them to give him his due. Suddenly he was beloved by a lot more than that original coalition. I think begrudgingly much of Chicago, not all of Chicago, there's some stone cold racists,
right?
But he was begrudgingly embraced by a lot of unlikely suspects in the Northwest, Southwest
Right.
side. He was amazing. He let everyone see themselves in his image.
Mhm.
You know, he was for this, he was for that. But like, I'm a reformer. I'm the first anti-machine candidate in at least a couple of generations. And that's what, you know, kind of more progressive-minded white lakefront anti-machine people saw. The Latino community is like, hey, we're dealing with the same bias and stuff. The gay community offers their hand in support, and he accepts it, and you know, stands there next to now his gay comrades. As other people have said, he was just extraordinary in that way. Coalition.
Well, I remember it is, you know, after he died and was lying in state at City Hall, and there were lines around the blocks in the freezing cold in late November, and a very multiracial, multi-ethnic group. There were a lot of people a lot more people loved him at the end than at the beginning, and that's worth saying. So Peter Nolan, you get the final word, the greatest lesson or final thought on Harold Washington.
Well, along the lines of what you're talking about how he brought people together. I have a picture I'm very proud of in my home of my wife and me and Harold at a dinner dance. You know where it is? It's out on the southwest side at Bill Lipinski's ward, the 23rd ward, which probably did not vote too heavily, but Lipinski was for Harold. And he shows up at this this dinner dance, and I remember him doing the polka with Polish women. So my thing about him was he kind of represented what Dr. King always said was you can't fight hate with more hate. You have to fight it with love. And I think that's the lesson that I feel like.
Yeah.
Nice final word.
And
said.
Laura, I just before we end this wonderful discussion, though, I do have one thing that has stuck with me. I was a beginning political reporter when I covered the campaign, and I had a very big part in some of the council wars coverage. Was a big player in covering Luis's 26th ward automatic run that helped give Washington power. But in the run-up to the re-election, there was Harold Washington was leaving it open as to how he would run. Would he say he's a Democrat or not? Because Tom Hines was going to form his own party. People wanted to avoid a loss. People wanted two bites at the apple. And this is what set the stage for changing the rules over how we elect mayors. It is in that, you know, this partisan election we have that we're going into next year in Chicago was an attempt to stop Harold, to always give a one-on-one and not just have in a Democratic city, have him win. So I'm asking him, are you going to run as a Democrat? Are you going to form a party? What are you going to do? And I had the wink and the nod. I knew he was always a Democrat, but he said, well, I can't tell you. I said, why can't you tell me? Because in politics, said Harold Washington, you always have to leave them guessing. And that's a lesson that I have found is true to this day in every arena of government and politics that I've covered. And Laura, I know we've spent a lot of time together. It's a historic show for At the Table. And as we finish up here, I want to thank all our guests for joining us as we mark the 100th anniversary of the birth of Harold Washington. Thank you so much. Joining us now is Becky VV, the WBEZ government and political reporter. And Lauren, Becky, we have a lot of politics going on this week, but let's just jump in on some breaking news right now when it comes to the very crowded 1st Congressional District race. SEIU local has just endorsed Pat Dowell, the 3rd Ward Alderman. So let's just put it out there. It is a crowded race. We'll talk about some of the money that each is raising because the FEC figures came out this week. But Laura, is there any way 1 or even 2 endorsements in this race, when you have so many major contenders, can make a difference?
No, I think it's too early to say that, but right now apparently it's not working for Karen Orange and Reeves, who has been endorsed by the incumbent, Bobby Rush, and and as Becky will tell us, she's sort of down there on the fundraising scale. So I think the most important thing right now is going to be looking at money in terms of viability, but I think it's wide open right now.
Right. On the other hand, there are 3,500 foot soldiers in the district, which if they are activated can mean something. Becky, so we know Alderman Rush is with Karen Norrington Reeves.
Right.
Actually, Jesse, and here, let's talk about Jonathan Jackson for a moment.
Right.
He had very lackluster fundraising, but he has potentially one of the biggest names around. Is that going to help him that he is the son of Reverend Jesse Jackson?
I think certainly in terms of name recognition, it's a name people in the district have heard. It's kind of, the Jackson family is the same level as Bobby Rush in a lot of ways. I do think because it's a crowded field, the benefit of having ground foot soldiers will be a factor. I think if you can mobilize your base, this could end up being one with 15 to 20% of the vote. It's going to be won during the primary. There are, I think it's 19 or 20 Democrats on the ballot. They're going to be ruling today, I think, at the state board as to if anybody gets booted from the ballot. But Jonathan Jackson certainly has the name recognition. He does have some union transit workers, I think, are on his side. That's where he made his endorsement. And he also got the endorsement of Chuy Garcia, who's a very familiar name here in Chicago as well.
Yeah, but he hardly leveraged that, okay? He didn't even get the word out. He barely has a campaign organization from what I see in the terms of a smooth running thing. But to your point, Becky, and to Laura's point, I think the one to watch, though she got in late, is State Senator Jacqueline Collins. Given the few weeks she was in, we can't assess her fundraising really, but she has a whole coterie of state senators to help her fundraise and who have organizations that probably can help her in organizing a campaign. And just so our listeners and viewers know, when we talk about the 15 to 20 that Becky meant, it's a plurality win. To get the nomination, and the nomination is tantamount to being elected. So
there's no runoff. I think people are used to the runoff scenario in the mayor's race.
I mean,
they think there's going to be another round, and there won't be another round among the Democrats.
No, I'm saying it's being elected, getting the nomination in the 70 Democratic district where there's nominal Republican candidates. So my point is, we could have a winner, which Becky said 15. I think it'll be 18 to 21% on it, which means someone with the base going in, whether it's a ward, though not all the third ward is in the district, or a big chunk of Jacqueline Collins, a state Senate district, not all is in. But I think you need something to give you a running start. So to that point, Jonathan Swain is a Hyde Park businessman who raised the most money, more than $300,000. But what does he do now to make himself emerge from the pack, Becky, then Laura?
Sure. So I think his money is gonna, obviously we saw, I think Dowell edged him out a little bit, but that was in part because she had flipped a lot of her campaign from the Secretary of State's race that was like a whole year's worth of fundraising that kind of pivoted into this race. But, certainly Jonathan Swain will have a challenge in getting his name out there. He's got the money now to do it. If you look at his resume, he does have pretty deep knowledge in city government and in the business community. And so to the extent that he can leverage those various pockets, he runs a nonprofit for black men to go back to school. He has the beverage center. He also has experience at the Department of Planning in city government. Certainly Dowell has a lot of the city government.
Well, that's the point. Everybody has good resumes in the very top tier. Okay. And so that I guess is the thing where I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. Everybody in the very top tier has a good story to tell, even ones that we might not be mentioning right now. We have people that have run agencies. So what is, as we move to other topics in a minute, Laura, what is the secret sauce that could somebody has, so if everybody can make the case, I have a story, I'm qualified, I know government politics, the money is really not a big enough difference at this stage in the first quarter reports for us to divine anything per se. And it's not one overwhelming
Sure.
endorsement that's going to
Sure.
do it unless, something happens that we don't know about yet. So what can make the difference here?
Well, I think one difference, and this doesn't narrow it down by much, but the women in the race, I think, have an advantage in this, especially if they can make the case. This would be the first time a woman would serve in that congressional district. It's been an African-American district forever, historic African-American district in terms of the people who served in that role, but there's never been a woman. And there's several high-profile women, some of them we've just mentioned. So I think that if I were a woman candidate in this race, I would really be playing that up. Not just the fact that I'm a woman, but also my bio, and also what the issues are that are out there that women are going to gravitate to, because women tend to vote at higher levels, particularly in this district, than men do.
Excellent point, because at least that's the way of getting, winnowing down the field, even if it turns out, as we head towards the June 28th primary, we discern the front runners are for women. At least you got to narrow the pack somehow, unless you really think, I already have my 18% base somewhere in there, 16. I just have to find 2. So let me have as many people in there. So everybody's going to have a strategy. So we're going to move to a new topic. And this is a story that's just developing. The city of Chicago and with their allies in the state are going to be bidding for the 2024 Democratic Convention. And we're in the crash weeks now because the request for proposal came out a few days ago and the bid is due May 27th. Convention for Chicago, Becky, good, bad, and different?
Are you asking me in my opinion? I'm not sure. I'm a little
analysis. Look politically, it will be a presidential year, it'll be the year after the mayoral, but the funding of it and who gets what will be on the table as we go into the 2022 and midterm elections and the 2023 mayoral race.
It's going to depend on who you ask. Good if you are in the tourism industry, if you are the mayor, this is good. It puts you on a national stage. She already talked a little bit about, all of the wealth of, a restaurant comeback and a hotel comeback. If we can host something like this, it would really revive the city. And that's why they're seriously going to put together a bid. I think also for Lightfoot and Pritzker, putting them on a national stage in a way that, as the host city, you get recognition. I don't know. I don't sense, again, it'd be after the mayoral, and I don't know enough about their own beyond the Illinois and Chicago world if they are interested in national politics, either of them, but certainly it puts them on a national stage. And again, the economic blitz you get from that kind of event. Bad, I guess, if you are, if you are a resident that doesn't necessarily want the crowds, doesn't want the traffic, doesn't want the kind of cacophony. And as we know, Chicago has hosted some tumultuous conventions in the past. And so that's sort of a certain factor, I would think.
Okay, so we lived through 1996, everything went smoothly. And if you lived in a neighborhood, you probably wouldn't have known it was happening. Laura, what do you think?
Well, I think that Becky nails it when she talks about the national exposure, not only for J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Lightfoot, but also for the Democratic National Committee. It's important for them to have a host city that will glow, that will look good on television, that will be able to accommodate the huge numbers of people who will be coming there, will have enough hotels, keep everybody happy. But I also think that, they may not want to admit it, but both Lightfoot and Pritzker have national ambitions. Pritzker's name has been thrown around as a presidential candidate. He had, he says he's not interested, but they always said that till they are. And so, and the same with Lightfoot's, but every chance she gets, she's out of town trying to cultivate national audiences. So this would be an incredibly valuable spotlight for the two of them to share and to get some national street cred out of it.
Okay, so here's the thing though, that actually I don't think mayors and governors in the end that the event is so overwhelming and you will have an incumbent president. It's not all that, but let me point out and what is more powerful if we want to put Illinois on a national stage. The Democratic National Committee is seriously considering changing the way we nominate Democratic presidential nominees. Right now, Iowa and New Hampshire have a lock as states 1 and 2 in those first presidential votes. There is a lot of thought to change the system, and the DNCs at one of their recent meetings is changing the bylaws. There's going to be an application process for states to apply if they want to be an early state. So we have a June primary now, but this is a one-off of the census. We usually have a March primary. We could change these primaries when, by the legislature. It's no big deal if there's a will. I put this on the table for discussion. If you want to really increase the profile of Illinois, don't we have to go and make the argument that because we are one of the most diverse states in the nation, we should get in line to have one of the early votes? What say you, Laura, and then Becky?
Well, of course, that's a no-brainer. I think it would be great for Illinois politically and in terms of its national standing if they could move the primary up. So if there's an opportunity to do that, so be it.
But that would also mean that we would have an early primary the same year that we would have a convention. So given internal DNC politics, I don't know if the DNC would give somebody something twice, because in terms of an economic boost from things, you get a really big economic boost from, and it's statewide, it's more than Chicago, when you have primaries going on. I mean, the TV commercials alone are a lot of money, but it doesn't, the hospitality industry doesn't get the big shot in the arm that it would clearly with the convention coming in. So I'm sure we'll be readdressing this as time goes on, but let's keep an eye on what our Democratic leaders want to do about the primary, and if they think you have to make a decision between one or the other. We have a few minutes left. So Mayor Washington, Willie Wilson giving out gas cards. Is this going to turn a mayoral election? And can Willie Wilson just really base his campaign on giving out gas cards? We'll have to see if he reports this on his finance disclosure now that he's an official candidate, by the way. This is, I think there's a point where you have to say, are you just giving out cash to people? Because a gas card is a form of a gift, like cash.
Right, but he's saying that this is not political money. This is his personal money that he's been.
It is, because his campaign is his personal money.
Sure.
He doesn't get to decide, I believe, under rules on this.
He has to report everything he spends. I mean, that would mean he did report, the new furniture he bought, if that were the case. I mean, he's running a campaign. He's claiming that this giveaway is completely separate from the campaign. He's not talking about it in the context of the campaign. So he's going to say that this is his personal money and he does not have to account for it. So I think we're going to probably have to get a ruling on that.
Yeah, there's also questions about what Lightfoot's giveaway is, given that it's bankrolled by tax money. I mean, it's bankrolled by the city budget. There was a big hearing yesterday, and aldermen, it narrowly escaped committee by a vote of 15-12, and aldermen who were against it were saying they just really don't think this is it's a shot in the arm, it's a gimmick, it's not sustainable. $12.5 million in the city budget could fund a lot of things that are not just 2 tanks of gas for 50,000 people. And I think there are questions and criticisms coming her way from inside City Hall. That said, they've dotted their I's and crossed their T's, and I'm sure they've run a lot of this through ethics already, and it's a little like universal basic income, that guaranteed basic income programs. If they frame it as a program, it's written out in ordinance. It's not a political giveaway, but it certainly, some people took issue with the fact that her name is on these cards, and Pat Dowell, the budget chair, said, look, your check has her name on it. So it's an interesting and awkward dance, and it's a moment of incumbent advantage, if you will.
And with that thought, we've done the convention, gas cards, and Congressional District 1, all ripe areas I'm sure we'll be talking about in the weeks ahead. Becky, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Join us for our next At the Table on May 19th as Laura and I look at the upcoming Illinois June 28th primary. And before I leave, please subscribe to the Chicago Sun-Times. We've got a great offer for everyone for the e-paper and the digital Chicago Sun-Times. It's only $2.49. You get every story, every photo, everything that the suntimes.com offers, plus you get our terrific e-paper, which everyone knows who watches the show. I look at first thing every morning. It's only $2.49 a month. Go to suntimes.com/subscribe.
I, Harold Washington, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Mayor of the City of Chicago
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Mayor of the City of Chicago
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations, Mr. Mayor.